Noam Chomsky, a linguist and analyst from the US, calls them masters of the human race. Others use different expressions like the government of the facto, the director of the world, among others. Mr. Anderson, who's also an activist, says that there's no ambiguity about the geopolitical vision, which is that of the G7. And he also reflects on the fact that the growing countries are not present there, and this diminishes their possibilities. We're speaking about a group that represents the power over the rest of the world. All of them with a supremacist story and colonist story. They're all members of NATO except for Japan, who is not part of that geographical area of the Atlantic. G7, is this a trap in the universal spotlight? This is what we're going to be speaking about today. Let's see our interests, let's see maps, and as always, we have your critical thinking. Let's begin by having some information from Saturday, August 24th. The G7 celebrated their annual meeting. This was in France, in the south of France, on the border with Spain, and the final declaration was issued yesterday, where it was read that the G7 is compromised with world trade that's fair and stability in the world economics. The G7 wants to change the World Commerce Organization so it will be more efficient in terms of intellectual property and eradication of failing practices. The G7 compromises to go to the 2020 to eliminate barriers and have a more efficient tax exemption. About Iran, that is also in the statement, they said that they have no nuclear weapons and promote the peace in the region. There will be another small meeting with results of this that attaining to Ukraine. They call on an international conference of Libya. Yesterday, the French TV summarized things in this way. The world has changed with a summit when there is a war, and this summit brings a peace agreement. It's even worse when we're trying to create a better future step by step. So what is useful? First of all, the exchange between countries, and second of all of the successes that we've attained, like in the crisis with Libya, which is important for us because it's about the migration and the stability in Africa. We were able to agree with the African friends in two summits in the near future and to avoid any wars in Libya. In the commerce, there were several tensions, but we agreed on two things. To have international taxes is very complicated, but we will do so. And about the inequity in the commerce, we will try to diminish it. So apparently it's crucial that there is some understanding. This has been a G7 very successful. There was a great unity. I read several fake reports, and I could say that we would have stayed another hour. Nobody wanted to leave. We were attaining many things, but the most important thing is that we're getting along swell. 7 countries, and it was really you, Mr. Macron. You've been a great host, and I would like to thank the great country of France. Another point that we already knew that would be in the agenda was the following. The G7 approved a 22 million fund that will be immediately put in use to pay more airplanes to put out the fire in Brazil. However, the French president, nobody needs a new initiative for the Amazon. And according to words of Jair Bolsonaro, We thank the offer, but maybe that money could be more useful to reforest Europe. The summit reveals a crisis on the diplomatic field. President Macron had said that how things were going, it was not possible to keep on going forward with the European Union Mercosur. Well, let's add digital sites. Let's start with elmundo.es. This is a Spanish website. On August 23rd, who is who in the G7 summit? Well, there have been 100 organizations that have come together, and they've created the antithesis that's calling this one as authoritarian. And the slogan is to create a neoliberal organization. And who are there? We can say that the most known organizations are the Spanish ones, like Podemos, Reivindicación Social, Cuesta, Ebildu, which is a Basque region organization. There has been a lot of debates on the organization, Izquierda Democrática de Cataluña, whose members fight for the Catalonia freedom, the Yellow Vests, who were important actors in recent events against President Macron in 2018. There's also the ecological NGOs that were limited to participate after more than 10 years of presence in this space. All of these organizations gathered together had 10,000 people in peaceful mobilization against this G7 meeting from the 21st to the 23rd of August in the Basque Country. So this is a little bit of the summary of who was there in this anti-summit of the G7. That is the space that goes against the tides and questions the decisions that are taken because they are profoundly neoliberal and they go against the interest of the majority of the world. Let's go to Telesur. On August 27, said China expresses their discontent with the mention of Hong Kong in the G7, where G7 reaffirms the importance of Hong Kong and its importance and calls to ceasefire. And they say, literally, this document that was presented, as I said yesterday, after 3 days of consecutive summit, the spokesperson of the Chinese Communication Center said that their government have been upset because no government should interfere, and this is exclusively an internal affair. We protest energically because of all of the pronunciations, statements on Hong Kong. This is what this Tuesday the spokesperson of China said. And as I said before, this is exclusively an internal affair of China, thus nobody has the right to interfere. Let's go to our recommendation. That's the Izquierda Diario. This is August 22nd, and it's called G7, Fragile Unity. This is from Juan Chingo. He's a writer. Love did not gather them, but the fear. The Chinese threat, as well as the fear of an international recession, has gained the fragile unity of the G7 in France. Le Monde says Macron has an audacity in the meeting, but was not said that this success was an exchange not to confront with Trump, but also to be on the headlines as well as Dr. Trump, as Mr. Trump. And nobody wanted to upset the Trump president because they didn't want to bring the G7 summit to an end abruptly. This is an opinion, a posture that is the first opinion to start adding up in our puzzle. And what we think is that for Trump, it was important to show consensus. Let's add a correspondent from France. Here we have our special envoy, Mr. Arreaza. He's the permanent envoy, and now he's in Biarritz, France. Good morning, greetings for all of the people who's watched Telesur. The meeting of the G7 has concluded, and now it's time to make a balance. Regarding the internal affairs, the first part was concentrated on Mercosur and European Union meeting and the fires in the Amazon. The second part focused on Macron, who invited, surprisingly, the Iranian Commission, and this brought lots of arguments and counter-arguments on behalf of Donald Trump, who at the beginning said that Trump was not authorized to mediate between Iran and the U.S. And then, when it was inevitable, he said that then he said that yes, he would be there, and he just fell into contradictions. However, the meeting with the Iranian envoy apparently was not useful to reduce the tensions in the Middle East. The rest of the affairs, like gender equality and environment crisis, apparently had no solution, have not advanced in any solution. And in the final picture, there was an attempt on behalf of Trump, Merkel, and Macron to present an affinity that does not exist and a unity that all of the internal sources say that it's broken. There was an official picture, but not an official statement. It's the first time that there has been an evident breakage of all of the members. On the other hand, Boris Johnson and Trump and the United States, who is greeting the idea of Boris Johnson to leave Brexit. Against, we have the people of the Basque community have said that there has been an excessive police guard on their procession. There was a protest against the G7, and the ambience was happy and peaceful. And yesterday, on Sunday, all of the protesters found themselves with thousands of police controlling constantly and impeding any type of mobilization, and regardless of that, they have walked the streets of Bayona. This is a little bit of what's happened in Biarritz in France. Thank you, Ibai. So the images and the statements of this G7 that was held this weekend until yesterday in the French city of Biarritz, that is a border with Spain, shows that they are really putting effort in trying to show some consensus, but there are great differences and that they cannot cover it up. So let's go to our first pause, and we will continue analyzing this topic. Let's see if France has scored a point in the mediation. We'll analyze this with our guests, and right after this pause. G7, a bloc that is trapped in the world. Let's go back to our topic. Regardless of all of the nice things said of Macron and Trump, that apparently were the couple of the year, there were big tensions in the agenda, and there have been no real solutions. It's unmaskable, the difference of the European nations with the U.S. in terms of Iran. While Donald Trump, that leaves the Vienna Accord in 2015 and sends harsh words to Iran, Europe does not see this with good eyes because of the instability that it may cause, because the threats of the U.S. hinders their possibility of commercialization the Iranian oil. In this sense, the presence in Biarritz of the main delegate of the diplomat of Iran, this made that the agenda changed, and it was not well received by everybody. Macron even found a half an hour to meet with the Iranian envoy. At the end, Macron said that there was a possibility in the upcoming weeks with a face-to-face with Rouhani and Trump. And Trump did not deny it. On the contrary, he said that this would happen when the circumstances are appropriate. Rouhani said that a dialogue with the U.S. could only be possible after lifting the unfair sanctions and the reincorporation to the Vienna Pact. While this doesn't happen, he will not fulfill the terms of the accord. France and Germany said that if what Mr. Johnson is trying to do is introduce modifications to the previous accord that was already agreed with Theresa May and Brussels, they will not accept it. And the Finnish dateline would be October 31st. Johnson is willing to leave without an agreement, but the president of the European Council said that he expected that Johnson would not leave without an agreement. To this, we have to add the situation of Russia, because they were expelled due to Kashmir. Japan and France are willing to evaluate the possibility, but the European Union rejects this totally. In this regard, Tusk says that the reasons are still valid, and apart from Crimea are other reasons. Well, here we have expanded a little bit more of the topics. China is another reason for tensions. The host said, there are conversations ongoing with the presidents of the U.S. and China. We expect that there be an agreement, but we've also said that I think we need to modify the regulations to meet our purposes. We said that we have to reform to stop these situations in which our countries are found when our workers are not respected and our property is not defended. We know of the reforms, and we will carry them out. And it was the topic of our discussions here. What is bad for the world economy is that uncertainty. So the sooner we find an accord, less uncertainty. And this was the topic of yesterday's discussion, and also the will of the U.S. president. To analyze all of this that we're presenting, I would like to invite from France Mr. Eraso. He's an international activist, an analyst. How are you, Hugo? Thank you for being with us. I would like to go to Latina Press, an article we saw there. It says, how to forget when Trump left from Quebec and his rejection to sign the final accord. And he went to Twitter and spoke about the stupidity of Macron to place a tariff on the huge digital companies. And they also threatened with awful taxes on the wine, on the French wine, because after all, the American wine is much better. So, what is really happening behind all of this? Well, I think that there has been too many communications back and forth, and that really have not much to do with the relationships. Because we knew beforehand that the G7 would not be easy to find a happy ending, because the impression of many analysts is that it was like a show where President Macron was given the court enough so he could just speak a little bit, but nothing was really going to be decided. The proof is that the final statement had nothing concrete. And it said nothing about the real issues that were going to be said, and they were just spoken on the surface with no conclusions at the end. So it's very hard to make an analysis of what we can take from this summit. And we really can't foresee what will happen. Maybe we'll have to wait on upcoming election meetings and bilateral meetings. The fact that Macron had surprisingly invited Iran and telling Trump just a few minutes previously, and that Trump at one point said that he was completely surprised, and this was not true. He was not surprised. This was already known on one hand. And on one hand, there are nice words going back and forth from Macron and Trump, and on the other hand, we see that Trump is very harsh with Macron regarding the electronic companies and social media like Facebook that are now going to have to charge taxes here, declaring him as a stupid man. But these are things that have nothing to do what is really happening on a real level, and that is not being shown. For me, the G7 is just a cover-up. It's not really real. So, well, one of the questions that we find from this counter summit is that a group such as this are never able to make a solution for the global issues, and they just reinforce neoliberalism and make the inequality even more profound. And the truth is that it's really hard with the characteristic of all of the members of the G7 to expect something in this sense. Well, exactly. This is something that people are very clear on here. Nobody was really expecting that something interesting might come up, especially in something that is the most important one. Two things. One, inequality that is caused by the neoliberalism and all over the world, and on the other hand, the environmental issue. So these alternative movements and that fell on the counter summit, some just went to the streets and wanted to manifest And what they found was a huge police presence. They couldn't go very far. They had no hope that there would be a resolution with solutions. They knew that the only thing that's left is to protest because they agree with the essential part, to maintain the system, the neoliberal system, in which everything is left to the markets, and that this would have no incidence in the problems of everyday people. So this was clear for the majority of the protest movements. Hugo, I would like to add some aspects that have to do with the characteristics of the G7, its composition, how they work, and the geopolitics, to later ask you a question. Let's go to this piece. G7, a bloc in crisis and with no legitimacy. Just like their name is G7, it's made up of 7 countries that are advanced powers in the military, economic, and that have a structural that's near one. Canada, the US, Japan, and Asia, and Spain, Italy, and Germany and France. The European Union has representation within because they participate as invites. We have China, Burkina Faso, Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, and Australia. They start in 1973 when ministers of finance of several countries got together by petition of the Secretary of Treasury. And then in 1975, in France, Italy was included. 1977, Canada also came in. The summit of the G7 are annual, and the headquarters rotate from one place to another. Previously, the ministers of finance get together and they try to find consensus previous to the summit. France is the president of during the 2019. And in geopolitical matters, it's important to say from 1998 and to 2014, this political group worked as G7, but then Russia was expelled after their dispute with Ukraine for Crimea. Europe opposes for Russia to come back, while the U.S. is asking for them to come back. All of these countries have conflictive situations within their countries. Without Russia within the space, G7 has no ideological counterpart. However, this organization says that they have the great powers, but they do not incorporate China. There are questions for trying to make capitalism and neoliberalism even more profound. They say that the leaders are at the use of the multinational companies and the richest people in the world. Along with the FMI, with the IMF, they have pushed the economic inequality that have become inequality to the highest levels of the past decades. And they only spend too much money in these meetings. I would like to analyze one of these points here to ask you, Hugo, what does it mean that Russia is not there? There's a paradox here because Trump asks the G7 to allow the president of Russia to come back. However, the organization says no because the reasons are still standing. Well, in fact, it is hard to analyze the reasons that Trump, as a person, may have to insist on Russia coming back to the G7, where not even Russia is asking for it. So what's going on is that Trump was one of his programs of the campaign. And what would not be nice is to see all of the things that he's been able to fulfill from his campaign. Some have had some real effects, but not most of them. In the case of Russia, it's just a matter of completing another check mark of his program. In regards to Iran, the attack on Iran and this embargo of the oil has to do with one of the points of the agenda on which he ran, where he said that the decision of President Obama was stupid and that they would have to revert the situation because he thought is not coherent. And on the contrary, some countries did approve that Iran stop their development of nuclear development, and they were fulfilling the agenda. So these assumptions have to do with the personality of Trump and also with aspects of the geopolicies that are a bit more profound. The heritage that a meeting such as this one has left is that they are seen as a comedy. They are mocked at. So this shows that, as Macron said, this is not a conference to solve things. It's a club of friends where they get together to exchange opinions. But the real things are solved in other instances, other type of organisms that are not just like an event. So this has been evident. But now this has been evident in the summit, and the problems with China and the U.S. and the U.S.'s fears, and the fact that China has shown that they have an economic and commercial capacity, and that's gaining space over the U.S. This makes that the geopolitical scenario and that the measures that are taken do not appear in this World Forum. So this is dealt with in other spaces. And what we see is that we can find conclusions in an event such as this one. Yeah, communication is not very good. I'm sorry. We were not able to hear correctly. But it's interesting to see that that G7 is just a comedy. It's nothing else than a club of friends to exchange opinions. But real things are not solved here. Next to him was President Macron, trying to show that he is giving a gift to all of his colleagues in one of the rounds. It was a watch that he had given. And let's not forget that these organizations in Spain had also been protesting and saying that these meetings are only used to spend too much money, and that could be used for so many other problems. Let's go back to two questions. A bloc with no legitimacy, a bloc that is trapped in the world crisis. And let's see what is the real economic worth of this group. And to complete this, let's go to a pause, and we'll be right back. We're back with critical moves. G7, is it an organism that is trapped by the world crisis and maybe their weakened economic worth? In a plural world, the G7 has less worth. Although it gathers most of the most important powers in the world, the recession is a ghost that follows most of these economies. The commercial war between China and the U.S. is one of the causes. Weeks before, the Central Bank of Europe announced that there would be a new packages of stimulus for the zone. Some analysts agree that the macroeconomic net numbers show that there are weakness in the industrial sectors. However, some others are still growing. The GDP is grown, and the work is doing well, although lowering. However, the Central Bank of Germany, the Bundesbank, is evaluating some stimulus to help make the contractions equal. Analysts show that the growth comes from other countries due to their exports. And this is mainly in the automobile country. The GDP has fallen 1% according to the Federal Index Company Office. This is the second time that there has been a fall of this country. Japan and the U.S. are trying to include Japan in this group. Well, let's continue analyzing. Now we have in our guests a university professor. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for this opportunity to exchange opinions. Well, Professor, you said that this topic we can speak for hours. However, I think that we cannot expect much. Well, without a doubt, there is no hope. In this state of the capitalism, and this group, the select group of the G7, now they're not able to do something collectively. There is no cohesion. It has to do a lot with this process of integration, and there is none. And this is part of, as a result, that, for example, there are contradictions within this group, and this contributes to this crisis. So it's important to acknowledge that these are the largest capitalist countries, and they are confronting a trap that they themselves set, and that has generated part of the global crisis, where they cannot obtain the earnings that they expect. So this is the crisis that they themselves provoked by having these policies of inequality, of exclusion. Just as we saw in this group, it was a group of 8, and then they expelled Russia. And these countries that participate are the largest ones in Europe. But within the European Union, they try to increase their power, trying to take some other countries into this group. And these countries are opposed to the socialist theories, and of course that's why they try to expel Russia. Does the coming back of Russia, would it have any type of influence? Well, at the end of the day, the biggest enemy of the G7 is the socialism. All of those powers have as the main priority is that socialism does not come into their country, and that anybody who is a bit socialist must be excluded. That's why China is not there. Although all of the influence that China has is very important. And this without regards to all of the migration problems. And let's not forget the invasion of Libya. And they're going to countries of Europe. So this is part of their own policies, of their imperialistic policies. And apparently there's a lot of contradictions. This has to do with everybody is trying to bet on their own interest. So there's a point where everything collides, although they all are on the same side, but it still collides. So we're at a point that it's every man for their own. France is, without a doubt, is very clear with these invitations that they make. They have Mali, which is a great region where there's a lot of richness. And Macron says that they have some differences with the U.S. due to this. The U.K. is leaving the Brexit, but they don't want to have too much dependency on the U.S. So there's a lot of contradictions among themselves, but fundamentally, Germany that has relationships with Russia. However, the U.S. is boycotting Russia. So among all of them, there are an infinitive number of contradictions. Italy, for example, they're close to formalizing relations with Russia. Japan too. Japan cannot have a vote in this group because the European Union has to reject Russia. So there's many contradictions that do not allow for agreements to be settled. So if this happens, there's no hegemony, and they lose hegemony to confront the world's problems because they're not able to establish solutions. For example, in climate change, they all agree except for the U.S. The U.S. even withdrew from the world agreement. So they have a pressure, they have this work underneath the table because there's a lot of things that are going on that the U.S. is promoting. You said climate change, and one of the points that was included at the last minute by request of Emmanuel Macron was the Amazon crisis. We find an article of August 24th that says, what is the interest of Macron and Merkel with regards to the Amazon fires? And on the bottom, it says Macron, a president of one of the most colonialist countries in history, is trying to take over, to take the leadership of this, the problem of the Amazon. But this is just in his interest. This is a hypocritical stance on his behalf. They are the predators, and their defense of the Amazon does not take into regards that they themselves cannot offer an answer. Well, they agreed 20 million to support the Amazon. This is nothing because that's what they probably spent in this meeting. But this confrontation between Bolsonaro and Macron is because there is a commercial dispute between these two. The presence of Brazil in Africa is large, and that's why they have a presence in BRICS with some influence there. And this goes in contradiction with the French groups that have been displaced from their colonies in Africa. Fundamentally, the Brazilian presence is in the Portuguese countries, and now with this continental market of Africa, the BRICS will have much more influence in the African commercial. So the Amazon basin, there are interests of the U.S. to create a situation that will require the participation of the U.S. to take over, because that's part of their strategic plan. They expect to take over the rainforest in the future, because now they might be thinking of establishing military bases, because with those bases of support, they would do it through the military. And this is a terrible risk for Latin America. However, France, the United States, Germany will try to have a presence in this problem of the wildfires. So I think that the position of President Maduro and Evo on insisting to support the Amazon was so intense. But then we see the contradictions. We have the contradictions of these two, because the middleman impeded these meetings to go forward. And if it's not the G7, where can these things be solved? Well, just 2 months ago, there was the G20, and they were able to reach consensus, where China is there and Russia within the group of BRICS, because 20 is the BRICS plus the European Union, and it's an important framework to impose on the U.S. A series of measures to stay in line. However, this group that is in the U.S. power, that are ultra-conservative, and they're trying to do everything tailor-made for themselves. So we see what's going on. The world, where there have been conflicts that are generated to try to diminish the stability of China. There is a conflict in Russia, apparently, due to the elections, but everything is trying to impose to have the U.S. criteria. And they cannot do it before through the governments that are their allies. So now in this group of 7, there is a group of countries that have established some differences with the U.S. And this is something that we have to visualize. In this 2019, where I think that it's going to mark a time in regards to this world correlation of forces. First we saw it in Argentina, then it's going to happen in Brazil. It has to happen, because the decrease in popularity of Bolsonaro is huge. More and more people are getting involved in fighting against Bolsonaro and his team. And this is happening likewise with other countries. The re-election of Evo is almost unstoppable. And we'll see many changes in 2020 that are very interesting. Thank you very much, Professor. We will be profounding on this topic. Thank you very much. Let's go to conclusions.
Bueno, para resolver una primera
Well,
duda,
to
en
solve the
palanca de
first
cohesión,
question,
G7,
there
un
is
espacio
no
de veneno en
cohesion.
comedia, nos decía Hugo Rastarazu,
This is just a
club de
comedy.
amigos que se reúnen
These
para
are just
intercambiar opiniones,
friends that
pero las cosas
exchange
reales,
opinions,
los
but the
problemas
real
urgentes no se
power, the
resuelven
real
sino en
problems are
otros
not
espacios de
solved.
deliberación
Maybe in
y de
other
toma de
spaces, but
decisiones.
not in
Y
this
como
one.
lo definía el profesor Ernesto Bohm,
How
Estado
Professor
mayor del
Ernesto Wom,
capitalismo, que
it's
no logra
the
cohesión en ningún
capitalism
caso,
is not
es que
able
todas
to
estas
reach
potencias
cohesion.
imperialistas en realidad lo que no quieren es el socialismo, de
What
ahí la
they
actitud
what they do have
hacia
in
la
common is that
Federación
they
Rusa y
don't
la
want
República Popular
socialism,
China.
and that's why they
Nido
don't have
maraña de
Russia or China.
contradicciones porque
And
cada
they're
actor
full
está
of
buscando
contradictions
su salida,
because
está apostando
every
sus
actor
propios
is just betting
intereses.
on their own
Estados
interests.
Unidos
The
demuestra una vez
U.S.
más su ascendencia
is
sobre Europa
showing
y Japón.
once again
Sigamos analizando
their
estos puntos tan
tendencies. Let's
interesantes de la
keep on
geopolítica mundial.
analyzing
Gracias por
this
acompañarnos
topic. Thank you
y
for being
continúen en
with us.
sintonía de Telesur. Hasta pronto.
See you tomorrow.